I was sitting in my small apartment, going through some old letters when my phone buzzed. It was a message from my Uncle John, the one person I'd always trusted in the family. The message was short, almost too short. Your inheritance doesn't exist. You were lied to. I read it again, my mind racing. I had to be misunderstanding. What was he talking about? My parents had promised me that when they were gone, I would receive their savings, their property, everything they had worked so hard for. It wasn't just money, it was their legacy, their life's work. But now, according to my uncle, it was all a lie. My heart pounded as I tried to make sense of his words. My hands were shaking, and I had trouble breathing, but I couldn't let it consume me. I had to get to the bottom of this. If my inheritance didn't exist, why had my parents always talked about it? I felt a wave of anger and confusion crash over me, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let this go. I called my uncle immediately, desperate for an explanation. His voice was calm, almost too calm, as he told me, "There's nothing there. I looked into it. Your parents never set anything up. You need to stop thinking that you have something waiting for you." My stomach dropped. I wanted to argue, but something in his tone made me hesitate. Maybe I was just holding on to something that wasn't real. But deep down, I knew I couldn't be wrong. My parents had always been responsible with money. I'd seen the way they managed their finances, always careful, always planning. So why would my uncle suddenly deny it? Something wasn't right. After we ended the call, I sat in silence for what felt like hours, trying to think of any reason my uncle would say such a thing. But I kept coming back to one thought. What if he was lying? The next morning, I started looking through my parents' old files. I knew they had a small home office where they kept all their important papers, bank statements, insurance policies, and anything related to their finances. I started with the drawers in their study, pulling out old documents one by one. There was nothing there that mentioned an inheritance, nothing about a trust fund, no legal paperwork, no evidence that anything had been set aside for me. I felt the sinking feeling in my chest. Maybe my uncle was right. Maybe this was just another one of those promises parents make but never actually follow through on. But then, as I sifted through a box in the corner of the room, something caught my eye. It was a letter, faded but still legible, addressed to a law firm I didn't recognize. My fingers trembled as I opened it. The letterhead read, "Legal Affairs and Trust Management." My heart skipped a beat. This was something real. The letter mentioned a trust that had been set up for me, detailing the terms and conditions. It mentioned bank accounts, investments, and even a piece of property. The inheritance was real. My uncle had been lying. With the letter in hand, I felt a rush of both relief and rage. Why would he lie to me about something so important? I needed answers. I started calling the law firm mentioned in the letter, my mind racing with thoughts of what to do next. They confirmed that a trust had indeed been set up, with all the legal details pointing directly to me as the beneficiary. I couldn't believe it. My uncle had known about this. And yet, he told me there was nothing. Why would he hide the truth? The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. He wanted it all for himself. Maybe he thought I would just give up, let him have everything, and walk away without asking any questions. But I wasn't about to let that happen. I couldn't. I needed to confront him. I gathered the documents and made sure everything was in order. There was no way he could deny it now. I called him again, this time feeling more confident than I had the day before. "I found the documents, Uncle John," I said, my voice steady. "I know about the trust. I know about the inheritance." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. His voice finally broke the silence, but it was different this time, sharp, defensive. "You don't know what you're talking about. You're mistaken. There's nothing there. Just forget about it." I could hear the panic in his voice. He knew he was caught, but he wasn't going to give up easily. "You're lying," I said, trying to stay calm, but the anger was bubbling up inside me. "I have the papers right here. You tried to take everything from me, but it's not going to work. I'm taking this to a lawyer." The call ended abruptly, but I could tell he was rattled. For the next few days, I gathered more information, reaching out to the law firm, securing the documents I needed, and preparing myself for whatever fight might come next. I wasn't going to let him get away with this. My parents' hard work, their careful planning, it all meant something. I wasn't going to let my uncle twist it into something he could claim for himself. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. How many people had he deceived in his life? How many others had he manipulated into believing his lies? But I wouldn't let him do it to me. When I finally took everything to a lawyer, he looked over the documents and confirmed what I already knew. My uncle had committed fraud. He had lied, manipulated, and tried to steal what was mine. The lawyer assured me that we would take the matter to court, and that with all the evidence I had gathered, we were in a strong position. I was going to win this, no matter how hard my uncle tried to fight back. As the legal process began, I watched my uncle's confidence slowly erode. The more the truth came to light, the more desperate he became. He tried to spin new stories, deny everything, but the facts were clear. The trust was mine, and there was no way he was going to take it. The court case dragged on for months, but eventually, the decision was made. My uncle's claims were dismissed, and the inheritance was officially mine. He was left with nothing but his own lies. The relief that washed over me was overwhelming. My parents had made sure I was taken care of, and no one, not even family, was going to take that away from me. As I stood in the courtroom, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. I had done it on my own. I had uncovered the truth, fought for what was rightfully mine, and proved that my parents had kept their promises. My uncle had tried to take everything from me, but in the end, he lost it all. I took the documents, now in my hands for good, and walked out of the courthouse with my head held high. The battle was over, and I had won. As I left, I realized that sometimes the best way to deal with betrayal isn't through anger or revenge. It's by staying calm, being smart, and never giving up on what you know is right. The following days after the court ruling felt like a strange, almost surreal calm. My life slowly returned to a routine, and I couldn't help but reflect on everything that had happened. I kept thinking about my uncle, John, and how easily he had assumed he could manipulate me. The lies, the false sense of control he tried to impose on me, it was all just so cold. But now I had the inheritance, everything my parents had left for me. My parents had worked hard for it, and it was mine to carry forward. Yet I felt a lingering sadness. I had always considered John a trusted family figure. Now he was nothing but a fraud, someone willing to betray not just me, but my parents as well. As the days passed, I felt the weight of what had happened start to settle in. There were moments when I wondered if I had done the right thing by taking it all the way to court. Maybe I could have just let it go, let him keep the money, and walk away. But then I'd remember the way he had treated me, the way he tried to convince me that my inheritance was a lie. How could I let that kind of manipulation slide? No, I had made the right choice, and deep down, I knew my parents would have been proud of me for standing my ground. But as I continued to move forward with my life, I couldn't shake the feeling that something more was at play. Was my uncle the only one who had known about the inheritance? I decided to dig deeper into my parents' financial records, just to make sure there was nothing else lurking in the shadows. I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that there was more to uncover. My instincts had been right before, and I wasn't about to ignore them now. One evening, as I was going through some old folders my parents had left behind, I found another letter, this time from a different law firm. It was dated years ago, long before my uncle had ever gotten involved. This letter referenced a different will, one that had been updated long before my parents passed away. It was clear that my inheritance was part of a much larger estate than I had realized. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. There was more to this than I had thought, and it was all connected to my uncle's actions. He had known about the second will, and it was evident that he had been trying to cover up something far more significant than I had first believed. It became painfully clear that my uncle hadn't just been trying to take the inheritance. He had been attempting to hide a much larger truth, one that had the potential to change everything. I felt my blood run cold as I thought about what this could mean. What if there were other hidden assets, properties, or investments that no one had even told me about? My parents had trusted me, and I wasn't about to let anyone, especially family, take that trust away. I would uncover whatever secrets remained, and I would make sure that my parents' legacy was honored in the way they intended. So, I went back to my lawyer, bringing the new documents with me. I needed his help more than ever. With these new revelations, I was certain that there were things still hidden, things my uncle had tried to sweep under the rug. My lawyer assured me that with the new evidence we could take action once again. He suggested that we dig deeper into the estate, look for any hidden accounts, and pursue everything my parents had left behind. The stakes were higher now, but I was ready. There was no way I was going to let my uncle get away with this. The journey was far from over, but I had a new determination inside me. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about uncovering the truth, protecting what was mine, and most importantly, making sure my parents' intentions were honored. This wasn't just about an inheritance. This was about standing up for what was right, even if it meant fighting against someone I once trusted. The next few weeks felt like a whirlwind. I spent every spare moment gathering documents, working with my lawyer, and piecing together the complex puzzle of my parents' estate. The more I uncovered, the more I realized just how much my uncle had tried to hide. Every step I took seemed to reveal another layer of deceit. It wasn't just the inheritance he wanted, it was the control. My uncle had manipulated the situation, hoping I would never question him, that I would accept his word and walk away without a fight. But I wasn't going to let that happen. With my lawyer by my side, I started to pursue all of my parents' assets. We traced bank accounts, looked through old property deeds, and examined every piece of legal correspondence. Slowly but surely, we uncovered more investments, real estate holdings, and even businesses that I hadn't known about. My parents had been far more successful and far more careful than I had ever realized. They had left behind a legacy that was bigger than I had imagined, a legacy that my uncle had tried so hard to take for himself. It was during one of our meetings when the full scope of my uncle's actions became clear. We discovered that he had been siphoning money from the family accounts long before my parents passed away. The accounts weren't just empty because of his lies about the inheritance. They had been drained over time. He had been taking what he could, pocketing money meant for the family's future, and trying to make it look like my parents had failed to leave anything behind for me. It was a betrayal on a scale I hadn't even known to expect. As I sat with my lawyer, going over the details of the new evidence, I felt a surge of anger. How could someone I had trusted, someone I had loved like family, do this to me? But that anger quickly turned into something else: determination. I wasn't going to let this man win. He had underestimated me, thinking I wouldn't fight for what was mine. But now, with all the documents, the proof, and the support of my lawyer, I had everything I needed to take the next steps. The truth would come out, and I would be the one to make sure of it. The following days were filled with tense moments and late-night meetings. I had become so focused on uncovering everything that I lost track of time. But with each passing day, my confidence grew. I wasn't just reclaiming an inheritance anymore. I was taking back control. I could feel the momentum building as I prepared to face my uncle once again. This time, it wasn't going to be a quick conversation over the phone. No, I was ready for a confrontation, and I would be armed with the truth. Then it happened. One evening, my phone rang again. It was him, Uncle John. His voice, once calm and collected, was now laced with desperation. "Nora, we need to talk," he said, his tone suddenly softer, almost pleading. I could hear the fear in his voice. He knew it was coming. I had everything on him now. He had no more lies to tell, no more ways to manipulate me. I didn't answer the call immediately. Instead, I sat there for a few moments, gathering my thoughts. I wasn't going to let him off the hook this time. I was going to confront him, face to face, and make him admit everything. The next day, I called him back. We need to talk in person, I told him firmly. I could hear him hesitate, but then he agreed. We set a time to meet at his house, just the two of us. I walked into his home that afternoon with a sense of calm confidence. The anger I had felt earlier had been replaced by clarity. I wasn't there to argue. I wasn't there to beg. I was there to hold him accountable for his actions. When I entered, my uncle was sitting in his usual armchair, looking more uncomfortable than I had ever seen him. He had clearly been expecting me to be angry, to be emotional. But I wasn't. I was steady, determined. "I know everything, Uncle John," I began, keeping my voice low and controlled. "I know about the trust, about the second will, and about all the money you've taken from the family. You thought you could hide it all, but you were wrong." His face drained of color, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of real fear in his eyes. "Nora, you don't understand," he started, trying to backpedal, but I wasn't having it. "No, I understand perfectly," I said, cutting him off. "You've been lying to me and trying to steal everything my parents left for me, but it's over now. You won't get away with it." He looked away, his eyes shifting uncomfortably, but I could see his mind working, trying to come up with another excuse. But there was no more room for excuses. The documents were all there, and his attempts to manipulate me had only made things worse. "I'm taking this to court," I told him, each word sharp and clear. "You won't get away with this. Not this time." For a long moment, he didn't say anything. He just sat there, staring at me, probably realizing just how deeply he had underestimated me. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "You don't know what you're doing. You'll regret this." But I didn't care anymore. I had already made up my mind. As I left his house, I felt a sense of finality wash over me. The fight wasn't over, but the hardest part had been done. I had confronted him. I had stood my ground, and now I was going to make sure he faced the consequences of his actions. No matter what happened next, I knew one thing for sure. The truth was on my side. The days that followed were filled with a mixture of nervous anticipation and quiet confidence. I had taken the first steps in confronting my uncle, but I knew there was still a long road ahead. The battle for what was rightfully mine wasn't going to be easy, but I had something he didn't: proof. With my lawyer's help, we began preparing for court. We gathered all the evidence, every document, every communication, and we built a solid case. I felt more empowered with each passing day as I watched the truth unfold before me. My uncle had done everything he could to bury it, but now it was out in the open, and I wasn't going to let him escape. Every evening, after long hours spent with my lawyer, I would go home, sit at my desk, and go through the papers again. Sometimes, I'd read the same document over and over, making sure I hadn't missed anything. The amount of money my uncle had tried to steal, the way he had drained accounts, and the lies he had told were staggering. I couldn't wrap my head around how someone so close to me could betray not just my trust, but my parents' hard work and legacy. But the more I looked at the evidence, the more I realized how important it was to see this through to the end. My parents had set up everything for a reason, and they had left it to me. It was my responsibility to make sure their wishes were honored. The day of the court hearing finally arrived. I felt a knot in my stomach as I walked into the courthouse, but I also felt a sense of resolve. This was the moment. I wasn't walking into that room as a victim or someone who had been deceived. I was walking in as someone who had fought for the truth and would make sure it was heard. My uncle was there too, sitting with his lawyer, his posture stiff and defensive. He barely looked at me as I entered the room, but I could tell he was nervous. He had no idea what was coming. The judge called the case to order, and I could feel the weight of the room settle on me. My lawyer stood beside me, going over our arguments, presenting the evidence piece by piece. As the details of my uncle's lies and deceit were read out loud, I could see the color drain from his face. The truth was undeniable, and my uncle knew it. His lawyer tried to make a few weak arguments, but they were quickly shut down. Every time he tried to spin a new story, I could see the judge's expression harden. There was no escaping the facts. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up, my hands steady despite the racing thoughts in my head. "Your Honor," I began, my voice calm but firm. "This is not just about money. This is about honoring my parents' wishes and protecting what they left behind. My uncle tried to steal from me, from our family, and I will not allow that to happen." I could see my uncle shift uncomfortably in his seat, but I didn't look at him. I kept my focus on the judge, making sure every word I said was clear and true. My parents worked their entire lives to build something, to leave something for me, and I will make sure that legacy is respected. My uncle's actions were not just dishonest, they were criminal. The room fell silent as I finished speaking. The judge nodded, and my lawyer continued to present the final pieces of evidence. My uncle's lawyer tried to object once more, but the judge quickly dismissed it. The look on my uncle's face told me everything I needed to know. He knew he had lost. He had gambled with my trust, and now he was facing the consequences. There was no way out for him now. The judge took a moment to review everything, then finally spoke. "The court finds the evidence overwhelmingly in favor of Ms. Nora," he said. "All assets are to be returned to her. The defendant will not be allowed to claim any part of the estate." The words hit me like a wave of relief. My heart pounded in my chest as I heard the final ruling. I had won. My uncle sat there, speechless, as the gravity of the decision sank in. He had lost everything, and it was all because of his own actions. I could see the rage building in him, but he knew there was nothing he could do now. He had tried to take what wasn't his, and now he was paying the price. As the judge dismissed the case, I felt a sense of finality that I hadn't expected. It wasn't just the money, it was the justice. It was the fact that my parents' legacy had been preserved, and I had made sure no one could take it from me. Walking out of the courthouse that day, I couldn't help but feel a rush of pride. I had done it. I had fought for what was mine, and I had won. It was over. But as I left, I also realized that this wasn't just about reclaiming an inheritance. It was about taking control of my life. I wasn't the person I had been when I first received that shocking message from my uncle. I had grown stronger, wiser, and more confident. The fight wasn't just about protecting money or property. It was about standing up for myself, standing up for my parents, and never allowing anyone to take advantage of me again. As I drove home, the weight of it all finally started to settle. The anger I had felt had been replaced by something else. Peace. I had faced the truth, and I had won. My parents' legacy was mine to protect, and nothing, not even my uncle, could take that away. When I arrived home, I sat down at the kitchen table, the documents still in my hands. I looked at them for a moment, and then I smiled. It wasn't just about the inheritance anymore. It was about the lessons I had learned. The truth had prevailed, and I was ready to move forward, stronger than ever. The weeks after the court decision passed in my favor were a blur of emotions. I had fought so hard for what was rightfully mine, and now I was left with a feeling I hadn't expected: freedom. It wasn't just the money or the property I had inherited. It was the weight lifted from my shoulders, the sense that I had taken control of my life in a way I never had before. But even with the victory, the process had left a mark on me. I found myself reflecting more often than I expected, not just on what had happened with my uncle, but on the bigger picture of family, trust, and betrayal. My Uncle John disappeared from my life after the court ruling. He didn't try to make contact, didn't reach out to apologize or even defend himself. It was as though he had vanished into thin air. There was no closure, no attempt to explain or make amends, just a bitter silence. Part of me had hoped for some kind of reconciliation, some acknowledgement of the wrongs he had done, but the more I thought about it, the clearer it became that some people are never going to change. My uncle had thought he could take everything, that I would be too naive to fight back. He was wrong. But the truth was, I didn't need his apology. I didn't need any kind of closure from him. I had won, and that was enough. The victory didn't just change my financial situation, it changed my outlook on life. I realized that this battle had been about far more than inheritance or money. It had been about standing up for myself when it felt like everyone else was ready to let it go, about trusting my instincts even when it felt like no one else believed me. It had been about taking control of my future, my legacy, and my peace of mind. It was a lesson I would carry with me forever. I began to make plans for the inheritance I had received, but I didn't rush. I didn't spend the money frivolously or try to impress anyone. Instead, I took my time, carefully considering what I wanted to do with the money and the properties. I thought about how my parents had managed things, always careful, always wise. They had worked hard for everything they had, and I was determined to honor that. My first priority was to invest the money wisely, to ensure that it would continue to grow and provide for my future. But as I moved forward, I realized that the inheritance was not just a gift, it was an opportunity. I wanted to build something that would last, something that would make my parents proud. I started looking into business opportunities, exploring ideas that aligned with my passions. It wasn't about following the typical path or building an empire to show off. It was about creating something meaningful, something that would stand the test of time. I knew that with the inheritance, I could start something solid, something I could be proud of, something that would honor their hard work. As I began to focus on building my future, I started thinking about how this journey had changed me. I was no longer the person I had been when I first found out about the inheritance. I had learned so much in such a short time, about my family, about trust, about what it means to fight for what is yours. The experience had forced me to grow in ways I hadn't anticipated. I had become more resilient, more self-assured, and more capable of handling whatever life threw at me. And yet, even with everything I had learned, I couldn't forget the pain of betrayal. It wasn't just the money I had lost from my uncle's actions. It was the trust, the sense of security I had once felt with him. He had been a figure I looked up to, someone I thought I could rely on. Now, I was left with the reality that trust, once broken, is hard to rebuild. There was no going back to how things had been, and maybe that was for the best. The aftermath of it all wasn't just about the inheritance or the court ruling. It was about understanding who I was now, what I had learned, and how I would move forward. I knew I couldn't change the past, but I could shape my future. The money and property were just pieces of the puzzle. The real wealth came from the lessons I had learned, the strength I had found within myself. I wasn't just inheriting assets from my parents anymore. I was inheriting their wisdom, their hard work, and their legacy of resilience. That was something far more valuable than any bank account or piece of real estate. One afternoon, as I sat in my office, reviewing my plans for the future, I received a call from my lawyer. It was a brief conversation, but it was enough to make my heart skip a beat. My uncle had filed another petition, hoping to revisit the court's decision. The thought of him trying to undo everything again made my blood boil, but I wasn't worried. I had already won once, and I had the law on my side. I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. This was the last of it, I knew. This was just his final desperate attempt to hold on to something he never should have taken. But he wouldn't succeed. The call ended, and I sat there for a moment, letting it all sink in. My uncle had been relentless, but he was fighting a losing battle. I had already proven that the inheritance was mine. I had already won the fight. It wasn't about the money anymore. It wasn't about the property. It was about the strength I had discovered in myself. I had fought for what was mine, and now I was moving forward, leaving the past behind. As I continued to build my future, I realized that sometimes the best way to deal with betrayal is to focus on what you can control, your own actions, your own future. I wasn't going to let my uncle's mistakes define me. I wasn't going to let his lies or his greed steal my peace. I was moving forward, stronger than ever. The past was over. It was time to build something new. Months passed, and with each new day, I felt a little further from the person I had been before all of this began. I had moved on, not just from the betrayal, but from the anger and hurt that had once consumed me. I had transformed in ways I never could have anticipated. The fight for my inheritance had been brutal, yes, but it had also given me a new sense of purpose. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. The business I had started with my inheritance had taken off in ways I hadn't expected. It was slow at first, just a few small investments, a little research, and careful planning. But soon, things started to fall into place. I had found my passion, and with my parents' legacy as my foundation, I was building something that not only honored their hard work, but also allowed me to create something of my own. It wasn't about competing with anyone or proving anything to anyone. It was about fulfilling the dream I had for my life, one step at a time. I looked back on my uncle, who had once been so sure that I would fail, that I would crumble under the pressure of his lies. He had thought I was weak, that I couldn't handle the truth. But I had proven him wrong. I had faced the truth head on and come out stronger. Every time I looked at my business, every time I made a new decision, I felt the weight of that victory. It wasn't just about money. It was about reclaiming my power. Then one day, as I was walking into my office, I received a message that took me by surprise. It was from my uncle's sister, my aunt, who had been distant since the court case. She had always supported him, even when I didn't understand why. The message was brief, but the words stuck with me. "I'm sorry for everything. I didn't see it at the time. I was wrong. I hope you're doing well." I stared at the message, feeling a mix of emotions. Part of me wanted to reach out, to offer forgiveness, but another part of me realized that forgiveness was a gift I didn't need to give. I had already moved on. My aunt's apology was a small part of my healing, but it wasn't the closure I had been looking for. The real closure had come from within me, from the journey I had taken to reclaim my life and my future. As I reflected on everything, I realized just how far I had come. I had faced betrayal, fought for what was mine, and emerged stronger than I ever thought possible. My uncle's attempts to take my inheritance, his manipulation, his greed, they had been nothing more than roadblocks on the path I had to take to become who I was today. And now, looking at the life I was building, I knew that no one, not even family, could take that away from me. I had spent so much of my life trying to trust the people around me, trying to believe that family would always have my back. But the truth was, family doesn't always mean loyalty. Sometimes the people closest to you can betray you in the worst possible ways. The real lesson I had learned was that loyalty starts with yourself. I had trusted my instincts, I had fought for what I believed in, and in the end, that's all that mattered. The road to this point hadn't been easy, and there were still moments when the memories of the betrayal crept in, threatening to pull me back. But each time I reminded myself of how far I had come, how much I had accomplished. I had my inheritance, yes, but I also had something much more valuable, a sense of independence, a deeper understanding of myself, and a future that was truly mine to shape. As I stood in my office, looking out at the city below, I felt a quiet satisfaction. I wasn't defined by the betrayal or the fight. I was defined by my resilience, my ability to stand up when the world tried to knock me down. And as the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the skyline, I knew that this was just the beginning of the rest of my life. I had taken control, I had won, and I was ready to keep moving forward. No one could take that from me. I had learned that sometimes the best way to move on from the past is to build a future so strong that nothing, not even betrayal, can shake it.